Right. All right. I think we can start with the in progress items, kind of go down them. At the beginning, the FFIBC approvers, champions definition and status reports. Do we want to get a brief status report from that?
Sure. So I met with IREG and a few other people on Tuesday this week. That was our second review meeting for IBC. Essentially, we went a bit further in the code. There's still probably, I'd say we're probably like halfway through on that review process. There are a few things that we discovered since then. The major one was essentially like as part of the Mendel/Lee upgrades, there's now a there's an action return value feature that has been activated on the two public test nets on Jungle and on Kylin, and that changes the way that proofs need to be constructed for IBC. So it's pretty deep what it affects, because essentially like we need to support proofs all the way until that feature activation using a certain way, and then as after the feature activation, we need to switch to another way. So, and of course needs to be this needs to be to work across all chains, whether or not they've activated, as well as if they eventually activate that feature, we need to be able to take that into account. So that impacts, of course, the smart contracts, that impacts the IBC server, that impacts I guess like the front end or any other process that depends on the whole thing. So it's not very complicated. The change that it requires, it's just tedious. You just have to go through the entire stack and fix all of that. But that's we've got a grip on over that, so that's not a problem. There are a few other things that we have pending to address some, I guess, like improvements here and there that Eric pointed out as he was reviewing code, but in general, still going pretty well. And then I guess for I think in what probably would help from the coalition is to try to figure out what timelines are. Because we're gonna run into the same problem with EL Plus, where EL Plus, a lot of the things are pretty much ready to go, but we're waiting for, let's call it, attention space in the calendar of releases and communications. So we don't want to overwhelm that I guess like attention mind space from our audience. So yeah. So I don't know if there's anyone at the ENF or that has kind of a calendar of releases and kind of like PR and marketing events and whatnot. And if we can take a look at that at some point and just figure out where do we slot IBC releases and whatnot, that'd be useful.
We do have that, and you can reach out to Ted for that. It's also publicly available on the website. But I guess Ted or Stephen, I would imagine, would have maybe more details on the subject, though, of, let's say, attention space yield plus. One of them is more of a financial service and or has that financial component to it, which is different than the IBC side of things. So although both of them need to have marketing considerations, one of them is really in a different category than the other, I would say.
Right. Okay.
So it's maybe not apples to apples in that sense.
Got it.
And one of them really also is B2B. And if the B2C isn't being done, then B2B is not really being, it's not as worthwhile. Or whereas in the IBC space, I think Aaron would be more relevant in that discussion in terms of do we even launch with a reference or a way to actually leverage that function or not, is maybe more so that side of the discussion for the IBC. Because if we launch and people can't use it, then
right, exactly,
then is so I would say that if we have at least a reference model or a means to use the function at face value, I think that would be more of the threshold on that front, aligning as well with marketing, obviously. But
right. But I can talk to Aaron. We already had a few discussions on the topic, and we can probably work together in kind of coordinating the work so that when we launch the whole solution, for example, Anchor already supports it and has the robo infrastructure also supports it, and so on and so forth. So that's definitely something we can look into, and we can align together if that works for you, Aaron.
Yeah, I think the big thing is making sure there's like a use case for it that exists. I know there was talks in one of the calls about hooking Jungle and Kylan together and then having, like a test case there. And I think that's a good starting point for us to start looking at integration, because I'm assuming there's going to be some sort of token swap between those two chains. Not swap, maybe not the right word, but if we can then experiment with that, and most likely the place that we'll look to integrate the use case or the user experience is into our web wallet Unicove. So that way we have a functional example of how it'll work before we're on mainnets. And then as soon as the chains, each individual chain starts rolling out the functionality that people are actually going to be able to use for, let's say, the native system tokens, then we can start like deeply integrating that into Unicove and making that a user feature where we can detect, users on chain A, B, and C. Well, here's the type of swaps that you can perform, or the interchain transfers you can perform, and then have, I think that's what's going to put it in people's faces, is when there is an actual purpose
do something
and an interface. Like people could be like, oh, I'm going to move my Wax to EOS and then my EOS to TELOS or whatever it is. Like when people can actually experience it firsthand and see that live reaction, I think is when we'll capture their imagination.
NFTs would be one of them as well. We're speaking to Atomic tomorrow. That's one that when people bring up IBC, one of the first things that I hear often is, will I be able to move my NFT? Because that's real, it's tangible for them. It's more than just, it's the token, but with everything else, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, no, that makes total sense. One thing maybe we can leverage for that in particular, for kind of having like a use case and examples. Right now we're in the process coalition's in the process of gathering bids for the Secure Smart Contract Library RFP. And there are quite a few items in there, such as like the swap, the lending protocol, the NFT standard and whatnot, that we may want to also use as part of that, I guess, like a Jungle Kylan kind of demo, if you want. So for example, like the swap contract that the reference swap contract that's in the Secure Smart Library, we could also align that together so that it allows swapping tokens from different chains, and then that would constitute I think like a good reference use case that would be complete, like from A to Z. We deployed IBC on Kylan, Jungle, and that reference swap contract, and then we can essentially demonstrate, okay, we can move it in there, swap them, bring them back, so on and so forth.
So having said that, in terms of timeline, is that then still realistic in, let's say, 2 months or so, which is what we talked about, or does that potentially add a few months worth of, how does that impact essentially the timeline, potentially impact the timeline?
For IBC itself, I don't think it impacts the timeline, but of course, like if that release was also dependent on that swap, then I guess like we'll have to talk with the whoever wins that bid and what their timeline is to release that part. However, this being said, of course, we can ask them to make that particular contract a priority, and then like just focus on trying to get that one out the door, and then IBC is ready for whenever that one is ready as well. So yeah, so I guess that's probably a good approach. So like I don't know, we'll probably talk about the RFP a bit later. So let's see what's happening on that front, and then we can advise.
All right, is that it for the status?
Yeah, I'd say so. Unless there's anyone else who has any other questions or.
All right, the next one, Scalability Blue Paper. I believe this is, yes, this is one last review by Zach, then to be sent to translations. Zach, are you on the call?
Yeah, so I went through it and I asked some questions in the channel where it kind of introduces the proposals as if there's going to be timelines and budgets on it. But then the actual proposals themselves in the document are quite light. So I asked for some feedback in the group, and it doesn't look like anyone responded yet of kind of what to do. So we have the actual, like, this blue paper is different than the previous ones because the proposals were kind of just like not final proposals. They were just the first draft, essentially. Whereas on this one, we already have actual budgets and costs and proposals for IBC and finality. So I think, but at the same time, those proposals, I don't think we have public links to them necessarily. And I don't know what we could link out to, but if we could do something like that, that would close the gap a little bit on not having the information at the end of the article, at the end of the paper itself. If that makes sense.
So when you say links out to them specifically for faster finality and IBC?
Yeah, so I mean, I shared this in the Scalability Plus group. Everything looks good and ready to publish, except I caught that at kind of like the last minute is. I think what happened was the text was probably pulled from another blue paper, probably the Wallet Plus. And it just like gives it's got text saying estimated costs and estimated timelines, but neither of those are given in the actual proposals on page 15.
So we need a like kind of a write-up on each one of them.
So I wasn't part of the RFP reviews of the bids. But and I know that there may not have been a necessarily a formal bid for IBC. Maybe there. I haven't seen either.
I guess there was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not involved in that, so I'm guessing there was. But it's just a matter of does it need scrubbed of certain information so that we could make of a different version of it public, and that would kind of fill in the gap here.
Yeah, I think last week we discussed like everyone was basically like chiming in whether or not they agreed to publish the bid, I guess like the RFP bid, and everyone was okay with it. So I think it's probably just fine to take that summary page and then I mean you could link to it if you wanted, or just like that. But
could you share those documents with me?
Yeah, no problem.
And then I could take it from there, I think.
Yeah, and then it's just a question of like how condensate, how like condensed you want the thing to be, because yeah, you can share the whole page, but it's a bit quite a bit of stuff there, so probably just better to add
I'll assess if it makes more sense to link it out or to just paraphrase it a bit and just add it to the document itself. But I just haven't seen them. But I think once I do have those, that's pretty much all that's needed. It's a relatively short document, only 15 pages and not that many words, so it could be translated in a day or two. And I was trying to get it out ideally second week of September would be good. So it'd be the week of the 11th. I think we could definitely target for that. and selfishly, I would like to have it be before our consensus upgrade for EOS, because it'll be the first blue paper under Antelope. The network is kind of leaping ahead to Antelope, and I just like that timeline. So if that works for everyone else, we could target for September 14th or 15th, I think would be good.
Is that realistic?
Yeah,
Mid-Autumn Festival is the week of the 11th, so you're likely not going to be getting any Chinese translators during that period of time.
It's essentially a very long blog article compared to the other blue papers. Like it's 2,445 words. That the Everything EOS Weekly Report translations are sometimes 3,000 words, and they can do those quick. And some of the other blue papers like 50,000 words, so it's a huge difference. So yeah, I'm very confident about that timeline.
Okay. I guess my thing less so for lead, but more so for travel status, which a few of us who actually do this work will be off on as of mid-September. Getting it up before that would be good. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely difficult during that period of time. That's my only.
So the fact that it's already written, it's really just coordinating it with an Adobe InDesign person, and then the translators, and then doing more InDesigns of the translated versions. It's not a lot of overhead.
All right. Anything else on that?
Where will we publish it? So it's Antelope blue paper, very first one. Antelope is currently a one-page site, does not have blog functionality. We could obviously.
Shall we skip then to Patty's item, which then will address this?
We can stick it in GitHub as well. The Antelope GitHub. We used to putting documents in the EOS Network Foundation GitHub, so there's that as an option.
Yeah. So you still want to have some analytics of how many downloads it gets and how many page views. So you lose that with GitHub. So we ideally want to.
So shall we skip to Patty's item, which will then answer the question that you just asked, but more efficiently?
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah. So sorry, Justin's not on, but he is supportive of this and wanted to bring forward the proposal. So one of the things we'd like to do is move forward with the WordPress deployment of the site. Which will give us more flexibility for content management, and there will be some improvements to the design as well. As you know, we scrambled to get that out during the week of launch, and now we do have a proposal back for 4 days of work at, I think it's $2,100 for Double Up, who is our WordPress expert that has helped the Enough launch take this on, and they're able to slot this in. So we'd like to propose move forward with that. If everyone is in agreement, we can get this done within the week, and that will allow some flexibility for things like Zach is saying, for publishing of content and shared responsibility across the coalition. So that's one, if everyone is in favor of that.
Just to confirm, the cost is $2,100, correct?
Correct. For the WordPress, there is a different cost or a different item that we've been going back and forth on, and I'm not sure why. There's been a lot of conversation about this, which is around the attainment of licensing for the font. So there's a cost associated with that as well.
But that doesn't really have to do with Double Up, or does it?
No, it does not. No, this is different. Yeah.
And I guess just so we're clear on this, budget is to essentially port what we currently have to WordPress, because there's not a lot. So it's kind of like this is just phase one to get us to the baseline. So we're on a CMS, which is something basic that we need really bad. But as we in the future decide to build out more pages and things like that, that would be that's not included in this.
Right.
Does the $2,100 include a blog page or a press release page / whatever? Post something on that website.
Yes, I believe it does, because we have a press page or thing one today. So it's just taking what we have into the template. So that would include a publishing page for press.
And Justin is supportive of this, or he's aware and supportive of this?
Yes, he's both. He's aware and supportive. He sent a note out 2 days ago or yesterday. Says that it's reasonable and in support of this.
I am good with this. I guess my vote would be yes. Just being cognizant that you mentioned also that you have 15 minutes. So if people feel rushed, that's because I'm cognizant of people's time.
I'm in that channel and I've been following, and I think that's super reasonable and would say yes.
I didn't really follow, but I think from what I hear now, it's definitely a yes.
Yeah, it's essentially a 3-page site. It's what we currently have, which is just a landing page. It's an index page where you see all of the blog posts or press posts, whatever we want to call them, and then the post page itself, which is like what we currently have, where the text of a single article would live.
Yeah.
The cost is reasonable. The timeline is quick. The work itself is relatively simple, and it'll align with being able to actually start deploying those press releases, including one we just mentioned. So I think it's a no-brainer.
Great.
Yeah.
So the second item that I mentioned was the font usage. And so there's been a lot of investigation. I think Justin has received a lot of information from the Wire team as well in terms of options. I think there's a lot that's been explored here. What we agreed upon is to move forward with the font usage at the 3,800, and that's with a 50% discount for nonprofit. And that gives us some baseline access to the font that we're using, and flexibility around how we use that going forward. So I think the GTM team is supportive of this. I know Douglas has had an opinion here as well that I think has been incorporated, Justin, myself. And so we'd like to just move that forward and close that item out. And there's Justin.
Can you confirm that it's 3,850 plus 50%, or 3,850 is the 50%?
That is the 50%.
Gotcha. I am in that channel and I'm completely lost. I don't think I've ever seen so much discussion around a font before. So I will go with what the team recommends, because I'm lost. Fonts seem to be way more complicated than what I originally thought. So that's my 2 cents.
Yes, I agree on that.
I think that the initial cost estimates made it way more. It was also way more expensive than I thought. It's insane. And the thing that I was bringing up, and then Patty, it seemed to agree right away, was what we really need is a lockup, which is not like an editable font that people can do whatever. It's a single flat vector file showing the word antelope in our preferred usage that people aren't going to screw up and stuff like that. So I think this is fine. It's it moved from the massive numbers that were actually being considered initially to down to whatever. I actually think we could buy one seat and be legal if we did it like this. But it is what it is. I'm a bit, so as much as I like Word or Wired, I don't know how to pronounce their name. As much as I like the work they've done, this is a point where they kind of fell down on fonts, and they brought us things that were potentially not usable, and anyway caused a big problem. But I think now we're past that. So let's just
so that others know, some of the options were more than $100,000 to pay for a font. and with not exclusive usage, with a certain amount of life. I can't comprehend that. So 38.50 is pretty cheap, even though I think it's expensive. I support that, and I would vote for that way forward.
Yeah, and this is a font that we were only going to use for our initially only going to use for our the word antelope all locked up, and it was a mistake. It was a bump in the road, but if we're going to have one, I guess this is a good time to have it. I actually, to your point, Eve, it's not even that special a font.
I guess to ask for clarity, if in the future we did want to elaborate on the use of the lettering in that particular font, nothing prevents us from then engaging in those discussions at that time and potentially absorbing costs, correct?
Correct.
Like, we're not locking ourselves in anything.
No.
So then, yeah.
No, we're
Then
licensing
no-brainer.
permission to use it in
And
this
it's-
way.
Yep, 1 to 5 users, I think it is. And it gives us the flexibility again, like starting, we're covered legally, and I think it's good. We've done, the responsible thing for what we're using, and it is unique. So there's value in terms of using it for the brand. And we've launched it as well. So, this will just catch up from the work that has to be done. So I think it's a realistic proposal to move forward with.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of talk about it because it was such a ridiculous amount to actually get all the way down this road and then be realistically considering a font bill over $100,000. Now that it's under 4,000, still see, I think we could still find more savings, but I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth our time to fight about it anymore at this point, but.
So Jesse, Guillaume, do you guys have a vote?
Jesse voted already, I think, didn't you?
I voted on the last, which was the website, but I mean, yeah, it's a small amount of money and we can move on. As long as we're confident that, 1 to 5 users covers what our usage will be, then I see no reason to waste any time.
It looks like it's perpetual for that number of users, and by users, it's users of like installing the font and doing editing and design work. So, once we have the lockup, I think we don't even need to renew it or change anything ever anyway, because of the perpetual nature. So yeah, I think we're fine.
Yeah, a lockup is not an editable font.
Yeah.
So I'll vote yes as well.
Okay, Guillaume, that was a yes.
That's a yes. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Patty, do you in deference to your time, is there anything else you'd like to go over today?
Patty's already gone. I think she's gone.
Wow, that was awesome. That is efficient. I can respect that.
She just disappeared.
Yeah. Respect.
All right, next one. Let's go. Keep going on the list. LEAP 3.1 system contract. What do we have here?
I don't think there's any discussion to be had. We had it last week.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we're all in agreement. And I think this item is closed.
I've got one minor update there, which is just that we've added it as a backlog item for the core ENF team to accomplish. So we're aligned that we're good to move forward, and we'll get reference-contracts as the name inside of the Antelope org. And I anticipate that happening within the next business week. It's not a lot of effort. It's just a matter of just getting that as the next thing that somebody does.
Okay. Good.
Stephen, Jeff, if you just want to reopen the item, it's the reference -contracts, I believe, not period. Maybe just to fix to what was written there.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all right. RFP Secure Smart Contract Library. Just a quick update on this. So first of all, we discussed last time, but Why Not has decided to pull out. They don't feel they have the capability, so we are down with the 3. Those final RFPs are due on the 16th, as a reminder. A priority for next week is Kirsten and I are going to work together and come up with a evaluation framework, because that's something we've not had to do before, is try to dispassionately evaluate something. So we will put something together, and then we'll bring it back and discuss it as a group and see if we're on the right track.
I have heard informally that the groups that are currently bidding may now be actually changing their approach and bidding as one, because the Secure smart contract libraries have multiple smart contracts. And so none of the teams essentially have the same, or they have some and they don't have some. And these teams have worked together before. And so there may be a proposal where ultimately they join forces and reduce overhead and coordinate as one. I'm not sure how formal that is, but I have heard that in the background.
Okay.
One thing I would make, I mean, it's relevant to that. We've never really discussed or pursued standards, and I think it's a critical thing we're missing. And it feels like it maybe fits in there. I mean, I don't want to just dogpile on and say, hey, we need to add standards to a requirement of this RFP, but if they're going to build secure smart contract libraries and we don't have like a standard for certain things, then we might be kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. Just obviously, Open Zeppelin, ERC 20, ERC, the other standards that other networks have, where they have the same NFT, interfaces, and we don't. Even goes back to the IBC conversation of, let's move NFTs across. Well, what if we don't all have the NFT standards, in unison across the board? So it just seems like we haven't really done much to pursue standards, and it's definitely a thing that has caused a lot of success and harmony on other networks. So,
agreed. I think the standard discussion by itself is a major one that we should be undertaking as a group. Just like you mentioned, any type of standard in Antelope right now is non-existent. We don't have a standard process. We don't have an EIP process equivalent. We don't have an ERC process equivalent. We have none of that for Antelope.
And some of that might be really easy. I mean, we on TELOS run a different NFT standard that Craig built than what is taken off on Wax. Wax obviously is probably the most successful out of the Antelope chains by far for NFTs. And adopting a standard that is clearly leading. We have a token standard. It's just unspoken. Like EOSIO.token is the standard, right? Like if you don't implement those interfaces, it won't work in any wallets. So that's an easy one. The NFT.
But we actually don't have a token standard, right? So we have the default implementation of, but is that really a standard? I guess we don't have an actual token.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. We don't enumerate. Everything should behave probably mostly like the default token contract. But yeah, I mean, to extract out standards from, just, fungible and non-fungible, most popular tokens that we have, and just really define a standard around those might be good enough for that first pass. And the process to get everybody to rubber stamp that, because we all agree that those are the standards, but we need to establish them as standards, whatever process we rubber stamp those with, maybe then the third one, which will be probably much more like a RFC type approach, whatever the third standard is outside of the fungible and non-fungible token, can go through that same process, and community can build and drive towards consensus on it. I don't know. It is its own conversation. You're right, but
it's a huge piece. We do need to put that on.
Yeah, it's like if we don't start talking and working towards it, it'll never happen. And it's something that we probably should have had, years ago. So
4 years ago, yes.
Yeah.
5 years ago, actually, yeah.
The first step in a standards conversation is just even trying to figure out which standards we need. I mean, there's some obvious ones that are we've been using their sort of de facto standards or close to it, but there's other things I think that are, as we as we've been working on like Open Block Explorer and things like that, there have been things that come up and go, how do we build something that's going to be standard across everything? So I think we'll discover that there are more areas than we are foreseeing right now once we actually start jumping in and doing it. So we probably need some kind of committee for that. Committees.
Well, that was the next question I was going to answer or ask is what we should do is assign one person to own that and then build the committee and then get that rolling.
This really needs to be open as well. The discussion needs to be completely open to ideally the thousands and thousands of developers on Antelope type of thing.
I nominate Lucas.
I second that. Lucas, you've been voluntold. Maybe just leave it on there. I think this is we're not going to resolve today. It's a massive discussion, but yes, it needs to start.
All right, gotcha.
Maybe remove it from Guillaume.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
At least now we have it on the Miro board.
And then just quickly tying up on that.
Yeah, go ahead. Stephen, were you saying something?
You've pushed your mute button on your microphone if you're still speaking, Stephen. Or your mic just died. Yep, audio died.
We'll add to that some of the stuff coming out of the SDK proposal will also fall into the standards. Standardizing lots of things is super important, not just contracts, the communication protocols, key formats, all that other fun stuff. That
API responses.
Yes, API responses.
We have one, and I put quotes in the air, client, which is NodeOS. And that, again, establishes an unspoken standard of how the responses should look. But if maybe in theory we'll have some Golang based client or whatever in the future, we should have it already established that it needs to respond in the same way that NodeOS does, because NodeOS implements the standard, not the standard is NodeOS.
Yep.
Or all the history solutions, like you said.
That's what I was just going to bring up, is we also have Hyperion, which emulates some of the NodeOS stuff and deviates from it. So the response types are different, and having that standardized would be super helpful.
Yeah, that's why I say I think it's going to be once we open that can of worms, there's going to be a lot of worms. But we need to start now. Best time to start a standards is 4 years ago. Second best time is today.
All right. Any more comments on that, or should we table that discussion so we can dive into it a little bit more thoroughly next time, or perhaps another time?
My silence was to say we can do that another time.
Yeah. I saw the note saying somebody was talking, and I'm wondering, well, we'll move on. Okay. Next one, P2P RFP. I believe, Eve, you have some comments on this?
Yes. Have others reviewed the bid submission? Otherwise, I will give a little bit on that first. And has anybody not seen the submission? Or at least, does anybody see?
I'm not sure we shared it to the coalition.
Okay, well then I'm guessing they haven't seen it. In that case, I guess regardless of that, regardless of all of the details, the bid came out. I'll give you kind of the overall summary. The bid came back, rough parameters. The bid itself is very good. Like the content itself is very good. Seems like it's quite comprehensive. It came back at roughly a year's worth of work. I'm not sure if it's exactly 12 months, but give or take that much. And if I'm not mistaken, Ted, maybe you can confirm it's $1.43 million. we and please confirm this as well. We took on the cost to actually draft the RFP, correct, Ted? Like we paid OCI to be able to draft this.
We
drafted
it with them, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so the RFP, or I guess OCI, has been compensated for the part of drafting. The reason why I mentioned this is way more than what I feel comfortable in assigning for this work, and it's much longer than I feel would be reasonable to do this amount of work as well. I mentioned that because in the so one is OCI has already been compensated to draft this, so that the content itself of the RFP, should we in the future wish to go out to tender again, we could do so. The RFP was very well written. We could go back if ultimately we don't proceed with this. And two, where am I going with this? It is possible that we could determine that I guess this work could be done elsewhere. So only one person bid on this, so we don't really have any competitive bids. At this stage, from my perspective, I would not feel comfortable in assigning this contract for that price, for that amount of time. It would require a treasury top up again, which will inevitably happen again. We need to do another treasury top up, the final 2 million, because we've already done the 2 million. We did the 3.8 million for faster final IBC, which kind of gives us that 6 million 3/4. We need to do the final quarter, another 2 mil. So it's going to happen anyways, but I cannot vote for this for that amount of cost. Peer-to-peer networking code rewrite was one item that EOS had prioritized and other chains had prioritized less. So I believe that that's perhaps less of an issue for others. The peer-to-peer networking code rewrite has also been, if you want to call it, tech debt that we knew from 4 years ago, essentially when the mainnet launches, and is when these discussions originally started, waiting a few months to see if perhaps there's somebody else that comes and bids for this, and or if we can get more details from OCI. I don't think is the end of the world. We've essentially been waiting for 4 years. That's kind of my first impression. I wouldn't be able to vote for this at this time. I think it's too much. It would completely drain our treasury. We would need a new top up, and there are other things I think that would be a higher priority right now than that specific work. And it's not to say that the bid is unreasonable. I wouldn't be able to vote yes today, and or next week, or the following week. Probably not. Thoughts, feedbacks, concerns, anybody else?
I mean, from my standpoint, this is nice to have, but not necessarily a must-have at this stage. So I don't think we miss anything by delaying that decision. And maybe we actually gain something by delaying it, because as we speaking for ourselves, as part of fast finality, we will also introduce additional message types and kind of slightly different, I guess, like additional patterns of communications between nodes. And I feel like if we I don't know what else we have on the table right now that would potentially have a major impact on I guess like P2P communications between nodes, but this one, like fast finality, will have some impact. So if we were to delay taking that decision, we would potentially gain more insight at the same time on what we need faster finality wise, and then potentially have an opportunity to open that bid, make some amendments to it, and essentially get more bang for a buck as when we decide to do it. So I would say, in a nutshell, I'm very comfortable waiting a bit longer before we take a decision on that one.
You also just muted yourself, Guillaume, for the last 2 seconds or so.
Yep, I was done.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to speak on behalf of Wax, but Wax over the past couple of days has been experiencing many issues that are stemming from P2P right now. So this may be a higher priority in their mind than it has been previously. I don't know if that'll weigh into it, but I bring this up just as a Wax's opinion may be valuable here. And the situation that's ongoing on a Wax could be applicable to all chains realistically. So there are certainly justifications for why this system should exist, and the justifications become more prevalent when there's a fire. So I know that the only fire that exists right now is not on what's being represented in these opinions. So I just wanted to bring that up.
And to give an idea, because I can see writing on screen, I was originally expecting roughly half the cost in roughly half the time. That's a 4x discrepancy compared to what I essentially reviewed. So there's quite a large discrepancy.
I mean, I like the idea of improving the peer-to-peer code. I know that there's definitely shortcomings. I kind of tend to drive things from a problem and what we're solving perspective. Wax seems to have, like Aaron said, potentially issues that would be a direct thing that we're solving, but rewriting just because it's bad and frustrating when you're like in that code, or no, it could be better. Not to say if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but the spend, the amount of time and money that we're talking about here to address something that's not like a big bleeding, gaping wound. I kind of tend to agree, I guess, with you.
I would say it kind of is broke. And it needs to be fixing, but the patchwork around it so far is good enough. But I also agree with what Aaron mentioned. It's one of those things where when shit hits the fan at that level, shit really hits the fan.
That's true.
Just have to, if it is delayed, this proposal, because not that my voice matters a ton, but it is longer and more expensive than I anticipated too. We're just going to have to accept that there are going to have to be patches, adjustments. We're going to have to MacGyver a solution out of what we have from time to time if this is delayed. So,
and this is purely around peer-to-peer communication, like how nodes communicate with each other, right?
Correct.
Yeah, my take would be that we put out an RFP for this. It came back really far above what we thought. Not to say that that's unreasonable, but out of scope with our general priorities. It might be if this wasn't on fire for everybody. I think we might reevaluate our priorities. But still, a year is going to take a long time to get there. Right. I think there actually, my understanding of the IBC solution is that there is going to be some natural improvements in peer-to-peer connectivity there that might contribute, might shorten the road once that's out. And I think we should probably just hold this. Just because we put out an RFP doesn't mean that we're obligated to do anything. It's not the right one. We can revisit it later. I don't think we want to give a impression moving forward that everything we put an RFP out for is going to get done regardless of price or delivery. So for those reasons,
to add to that, in the RFP ask or in the process, it's very clear. We made sure that we put that in there. I think it's one of the first clauses that you are not guaranteed a winning a bid, or I guess you're not guaranteed to win the bid if you actually submit, and or if you're the sole person, right? So we do make that very clear.
Oh, I know that's yeah. I know that's there clear in the legal language. I just want there's this question of perception as well, right? It's I know we're on solid ground there, but I think that this will firm that up for everybody going forward, and that might not be a bad thing. You know, we're not suckers for any. Not to characterize that in any way, but. Yeah, I'm just saying. I said a pejorative word, and I don't want to characterize this particular, particular proposal as as like we're suckers or anything. But completely separate from this exact one, I don't want people to feel like, oh yeah, once they do it, they're gonna, they're gonna pick one. We got to make sure that that's not the perception that we set up in these early days.
Correct. These are hard decisions to make, and I think that the precedent that this sets is actually very important. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I think it's really important that we may not always decide to go forward with something. I think that that's really important. That brings, and it speaks to the accountability of this group and that fiscal responsibility and the greater overall vision of ensuring that we are responsible with what we're doing here in this group. I think that is really important.
Yeah.
And we're doing so transparently.
We have to
this is being recorded.
Legality.
Everybody can see this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is unfortunate. We're not going to be able to do it right away, but the serendipitous part is it lets us show that we are frugal. We are what our principles are, and there we can revisit this, in a quarter probably, and see where we're at that point.
All right. Next item, documentation Antelope work group. Let's see.
I think the meeting is still pending. It's at the end of this week, or is it next week?
Yeah, 5/9. So it looks like next week.
So I think that one's on hold till then.
Yep. All right. A reprioritization of top 21.
That's for next week.
Yep. Block Explorer discussion.
I think
there wasn't a lot of we sensed there wasn't a lot of interest in continuing that at this point. So if you're doing that because of TELOS, we've sort of moved on and got our okay from you guys to potentially deploy something that could handle multiple networks, but we don't need to have a discussion about it unless someone else wants to.
All right, should we mark this closed then?
I think you can then move to, I'm not sure which category Kirsten moves to, but it's kind of like shelved for a period of time.
All right. Yeah,
it doesn't disappear, but yeah.
Yep. All right. Assignment technical project. I think this was closed. We said there was going to be 2 approvers. This was a generalized discussion when we got, like faster finality or SDKs, that we were going to have essentially 2 people assigned.
A minimum of 2.
Minimum of 2. More, that's right. In a case by case.
On a case by case, but generally minimum of 2. The goal was the plan was to assign those people very early in the process, so that everyone knew, down the road who was going to be the approver, and we probably have a limited number of people who can approve each thing. So we'll try to balance that as best as possible. And beyond that, I think we generally settled that. Is my recollection.
So I think this is closed. Would everybody agree with that?
I'm not sure. Yes, but I don't think so. We've assigned the approvers theoretically for faster finality and IBC because by default there were very few people that could do that job. I don't think we did so for SDKs though.
Yeah, I think so. There's another item which is specific for SDKs approvers,
which we need to get to. Okay.
Yeah, so we'll get to that.
Yeah. So as far as the decision about our approach, I think we've determined that the actual implementation of it, we'll continue for each specific project. I think that's where we're at.
Yep.
Agreed.
All right. Future process and resources for RFP creation. So this was for Kirsten. I don't know if we want to table this till next week.
Well, there's something that actually is relevant to what we just discussed with peer-to-peer, P2P RFP. So that first line, resources for future RFP creation, might be required. So I think this is a really good example of why we would want to assign resources for RFP writing, especially if we're using external resources. Because ultimately, if we decide not to pursue, then at least that line is already clear from the get-go, and people don't have this sense or this feeling of having been whatever. There's no hard feelings per se, because compensation was done for the actual drafting of the RFP. And also, if we ultimately want to use that RFP again in the future, we've paid to a certain extent for that content, and so now we can reuse it without again reigniting the feeling of, hey, you're using my work and you went in a different direction. So I think we should actually make it somewhat of a
standard
in a way, or part of our processes, that we assign a small budget for RFP and people can agree to help draft those. And we could use internal resources kind of as an extra, because obviously we need to a certain extent, but that we assign somewhat of a pool for that every time, roughly around the same amount, depending on the complexity. If some of it is really complex, maybe there's an extra allotment, but otherwise, I think that having that would be useful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I was one of the people who originally championed this, and because the other piece is that we don't want to be limited to things that we have, not, and we have subject matter experts within our group already. So we want to be open to those things. So for all those reasons, I think it's the right way to go, and I think we just happen to have a very fortuitous, timely demonstration of one reason why. So I think we move over. I'd say we should move forward with it. It'd be my. Good. I don't have a vote, but that's how
do we know approximately how much we paid for the RFP one, just to give a ballpark estimate of? I know it's per hour. It's different because it's in one of our contracts, but we paid for those hours. Do we have an idea of how long it took?
We don't. I mean, we could go back and scrape it and try to get an idea, but we don't have not off the top of our head. We can deconstruct it or reconstruct it from the billing hours, because we know who worked on it and we know approximately what time. So we can go back and get an estimate offline.
So do we want to just assign a relative budget where we work within that budget that seems reasonable? And that typically it'll be Jeff and Kirsten that will have that discrepancy to go act within that budget when drafting RFPs. I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think we should have that if we estimate a rough budget, saying, hey, we want to have X, we want to do X, we're up to this many per year RFPs that we'll be financing. I don't know if that's 5 or 10 or 2. Figure out what that number is, and then we can look back at the range of what some of these have cost, especially the ones that we're more likely to go out to. Then I think that we won't get in trouble, because the ones that are high will offset the ones that are low.
You want to propose something, Douglas, in terms of yearly budget for this that then Jeff and Kristen can't act within?
Yeah, and the risk of making the meeting go a little longer, I think this would be more efficient than having an outside meeting. I think why don't we budget for 8 per year? That would be 2 per quarter. Maybe that sounds a little high. we probably aren't going to do that. One per quarter seems low. So I guess
how about we just assign a budget, no number?
What's that?
How about we just assign a budget, no number? No number, as in no number of RFPs, and then we get them to.
Right, but I'm using the number. We don't have to be fixed into a hard number. I'm using the number as a way to better estimate. Right, like that's one of the easiest things we can come up with. Do we think we're going to be doing 5 of these a year? That seems reasonable, and if so, then multiply that by a median figure of what we think these are going to cost. Does this cost? Did it cost us $5,000 to get this?
I don't think it did, but if you did 5 times 5, 25, that's what I was thinking. If we act within that number, I think it would be reasonable.
You're the guy in math class who just writes the answers is right, and I'm the guy who has to show all this work. So and the teacher puts a little gold star on it. So
I'd be comfortable with that. 25K per year.
What's that? Yeah,
I'd be comfortable with that. 25K per year, and we don't need to use it. And basically, we let Jeff and Kirsten figure out, what everything is worth, and they negotiate. And at some point, we'll have enough data to have that median. Yep. And I think that's actually quite generous. We'll likely not use all of that.
Yeah. No. It's an earmark, right? So if it doesn't get used, it just lets us do our general accounting so that we have something there, and the budgets don't all get allocated without us doing that. 25 grand. I think you and I both like that, or comfortable with that number. Do we need to vote on this? And
I think we should. We have Jesse and Guillaume here.
Yeah, so I move that we vote for earmarking $25,000 per year for this purpose, for the purpose of paying outside subject matter experts to write up the actual RFP for projects that we deem worthy.
I'll second that.
Second. Thank you.
And I'll vote
yes as well.
EOS.
UX vote yes as well.
Jesse needs to vote.
I was just about to say no, Jeff. I'm just kidding. Yes.
I thought I heard you. So just to be clear for the recording, Jesse, how would you like to vote?
Yes.
Awesome.
Jesse's just going to vote no just to be contrarian right now. Just no.
All right. Good to go. All right. The new agenda items. Oops. We've got maintenance costs and resources for repositories and documentation, common public goods.
That's more of a just leave there so that we see it, but there's not really much that we can do or talk about.
All right. Wallet SDK approvers, champions, definition and status reports. Stand up.
That's an item for me. So last week we did a vote to approve the SDKs. The NF wrote the contract. It has been sent to Greymass. I believe Greymass is signed, but before I sign it, Aaron, you just unmuted it? Okay. I do have something before we sign though that I'd like to ask for the group. The way that the current contract is written, it's between the ENF and Greymass because Antelope, the organization, doesn't exist yet. So we have the funds in the treasury. However, if for some reason the coalition decides for whatever reason not to transfer other funds, but Greymass does do the work, ENF right now would be liable. So what I would ask for the group is that the group allows us to transfer over the full amount under the control of the ENF, and then we onboard that liability because now we have the funds, but we have the contract with them. And then as a group, though, we still vote on whether or not Greymass has met the particular milestone. So that doesn't change. So we do not release funds until the group agrees, but that way we remove the liability should for some reason the coalition just not want to vote or just not want to meet anymore, or whatever that may be, that we don't absorb that liability on behalf of the group.
So you're suggesting we transfer the funds before or very shortly after we execute the contract?
So essentially, right now, this goes to a larger discussion. Right now, ENF, you guys we sent invoices to you guys to fill up that treasury, right? So on our books, that's an income. We have no expense to match that income. This would actually close that. So we would close off $1.43 million worth of expenses that now would be earmarked. So we would no longer be liable for those taxes as well, and that accounting on that side. So that would be very beneficial to us, because by default right now we are taking on that liability on behalf of the coalition. So we would close that off. And then we're also taking on the liability whereby when we get into a contract such as this, which is very different than what we did with UX, because each chain signed. This one, it's only EOS that's signing, or I guess ENF that's signing. So we have the liability to pay out gray mass, but we don't have the funds to do so, because the funds to do so are under MSIG by the coalition. So we would still keep the accountability of the coalition giving the okay to transfer the funds, but for some reason, if the coalition decides to disband or no longer want to meet or isn't present on calls, then gray mass right now under the current contract would actually would be able to hold ENF liable, but we would not have any means to actually pay them out. So you would like to transfer over that amount, which is the total amount for the contract, which is what the contract is written for. That way we have the funds. That way that is an expense that then we come from the ENF, so that we can actually earmark that for accounting, which then offset the income that we got when we loaded the treasury from you guys. So it actually would close a lot of loops.
Right. I understood everything you just said. My question was just to confirm, you're suggesting we transfer the funds from the multi-sig to some other account.
To an account under our control, yes.
Yeah. Now I guess we've all agreed and voted for it, and you've signed the contract with Gray Mass.
We haven't signed the contract. That's what I'm waiting on for. I want to bring this up before I sign the contract.
So in short succession to each other, I don't know if it matters which one's first, but you guys sign the contract and then we execute an MSIG to transfer the funds to an account that's dedicated to this purpose.
To close off that liability. Ideally, actually, the funds are transferred before. That way we can sign the contract. But if there's the commitment to sign the MSIG, then one can come after the other. I'm less worried. It's not that I don't trust you guys. It's really to close that gap. And our end of year is for ENF is in 30 days, or September 30th. That would actually close the other liability, which we've been carrying for the last 8 months or so.
I would be fine with that. With the other thing that I would ask is, I would say is, I think, we're not doing any significant budgeting, but it's good to get that out of that account either way, right? If it goes into your hands because you're liable on the contract, I'm fine with that. But even if it was all of us liable, I feel like just taking it out of that account and putting it in one named, wallet dot whatever, just splitting it out so we know it's earmarked and we don't forget. Since our CFO is not here keeping us accountable.
In the future, this idea, or I guess to close all of this in the future, like all of this process, simply because we don't have an Antelope entity. If we had an Antelope entity, this would not be an issue at all.
Right. It underscores this underscores the need for that to create that entity. There have been conversations recently where we've said, well, maybe we don't need an entity, but then these things come up and we go, oh yeah, we really do. We have to do that. I would say this is not ideal, but the reality is that it's a very practical way to do it. The bulk of the funds came from ENF anyway, so I doubt that you're going to run off with what were originally your own funds, and to me the one less headache of tax liability. If you don't have a calendar year, fiscal year, I think that would it all seems to make sense, but it does. But let's remember this, that as we come back to do we really need an entity? Because this won't be the only time it'll come up.
And just to be clear, we can't run. Let's say we are running off with that money. Well, we're also running off with the exact liability of 1.3 million, right? That's the whole point. So then we're still liable to actually do the work regardless.
My point was to show the ridiculousness of the concept, right? Like, yeah. So it would also probably be very hard to overcome and continue to have a coalition if that happened, and too much work has been done. I don't see any risk of that. And you're right, we'd have the liability. I was just trying to show that that's kind of ridiculous, and this, we shouldn't get caught up on those kinds of concerns. So I think it makes sense.
What I do want to ensure is that when those milestones come up, that the coalition is still involved in the determination of releasing the funds, so that the other members are still participating in the, yes, we agree Greymass has achieved milestone X, EOS or ENF go for it. We're good with releasing that fund. So I would still want that record so that we're all still participating in this. It's just the technical side here.
I would want that too. The concern you speak to a concern I just actually didn't say, if anyone can believe that there's anything that I think but don't say, is that I just don't want, there is a perception in the community that the coalition is the ENF, and I don't want to do, things like this sort of could potentially feed that, but I just think that's not a big enough concern to do it in some, non-productive way on this one. But yeah, I would want to see that everybody remains on the approval of milestones, and also that, that this is sort of a detail that doesn't need to be, it's not secret, and we're not going to keep it secret, but we're also not going to bring that forward. So for all intents and purposes, it's always seen as a coalition project, right?
You could also, on that new account, you could put ENF as owner and put the same multi-sig on active and use that to cut milestones. Might ensure.
Say that again? Can you say that again?
Just like whatever account we move the funds into, put ENF as the owner, but put a multi-sig on active, and then we could still use that to, use a multi-sig to execute milestones. And
that's not a bad idea.
As the owner of the backup.
That's not a bad idea. So the backup would be if ever the liability, or if ever for some reason we are still owners. Yeah, actually, that's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, sounds good. I'd say if we do that, we should just put a quick on-chain, zero value transaction memo that is the intent of that, so that we don't have to go back and so there's no questions in the future, but that was accidental or anything like that. But yeah, that seems like another great solution.
Maybe that's
Jesse.
a good opportunity to create the account that Zach mentioned, which is antelope.wg, and we transfer over the funds to that account, and then we can change the permission set in the future, but at least that would be the first usage of that account. And having said that, because this is going to be recorded and published, can somebody go and reserve that name or buy that name?
Well, who has the WG namespace is what we really need. Who set up the first one?
Denis set this up for me. Okay, so heads up, if we can't do this before, let's remove this part from the video, Brandon, if we can't reserve the name before this video is published.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, no one can really snipe it. I don't know if it's on EOS.
No, I think he actually reached out to the owner and got this for us and paid for it and whatever, but
cool.
What's the name of the current one? It's EOSIO plus.wg?
Yep.
No. Yes.
Yep.
PLUS?
What's the significance of WG?
Working group.
Oh.
I think because we tried different, like foundation or found or whatever, and there's too many characters and it was hard to do.
Yeah.
But antelope.wg works. I just now need to find okay, I'll try to figure that out. And Brandon, I'll let you know if you need to remove that before we actually publish.
Sure.
All right, so should we go ahead and vote on this approach? I'm assuming.
Well, the one,
you're for it?
sorry, the one thing with moving all this into the Antelope.wg, I mean, this is a slightly different use of funds. That this is a specific. I think I think that this actually does require its own. If we're going to have ENF be the owner key, and then everybody else be on the multi-sig the active key. I don't think we want to do that for everything we do. I think that's for this specific project, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't think we can.
The same permissions and all the funds, and then.
No, that's why I was suggesting when this is done, we then replace the permission sets on this. But I guess, yes, it won't be done for a while because it's milestone based. There's a year worth of work. We'll probably be filling up the treasury before that. So yes, in that case, I agree. Yes.
Yeah, we'll just keep them distinct. But create.
So then you need a name for the wallet STK account, but you could probably just make one up that's not, short name, just something that's 12 characters.
I'm sure we're all good at trying to get 12 character names.
Aaron has the GM namespace.
Aaron, you want to get paid? Can you create us an account with the parameters that we just laid out, please?
Yes.
Do wallet SDK.gm.
I mean, you're owner of a premium namespace, so I'm guessing it's pretty easy on your end.
Yeah, it is.
And then you can put me as the owner, and then the me as active, and the same permission set, basically the three others as the active, or the four in total as the active. But
yeah, and I may go back and forth about the name itself. But
wait a minute, I don't necessarily want to have one owner key. No, can you also create some type of a time? We need protection on that account. If there's going to be $1.4 million in it, I actually don't want that under my name, and I would not want that where there's only one key. There definitely needs.
Well, you could have a multi-key. You could have a multi-key permission and just have everybody be a member of the ENF, right? You could have you and Don and Zach, or you and Ted and Zach.
Yeah, but then it's under our name. I'm not sure I actually want that liability necessarily myself.
Well, we're effectively calling those your funds, right? For this,
no ENF funds, but ENF right now.
Just use the same. Just use the same that you have on EOSIO grants.
What does ENF do for other multi-sig payments?
EOSIO grants deductive.
No, but we don't. Yeah, the EOSIO grants is different. Owner key is EOSIO prods. And then the active key is a combination of 3 plus 72-hour delay.
But that seems appropriate.
So we could do, I guess, the 3 plus 72-hour delay. Let me think about that part. Let me think about that.
I think that
that's very different.
So my idea complicated things.
Delay it doesn't give us Antelope the protections. As I recall, initially the idea was that would give the BPs on EOS 3 days in case you ran, you proposed something and you ran off, and they would have the ability to then freeze that, which we don't have. And so and again, we're saying you guys are assuming the liability. You guys ENF assuming the liability also is going to have control of the funds. So it's intentional in this case for you to have control of the funds, right?
Yes, but there's a difference between the ENF and having control of the funds or Yves Larose having control of the funds. Right?
Sorry,
as ENF, I have a director insurance. As Yves Larose, if my only account is the one that's an owner, then it's me. It's not the ENF. So there's a very big difference in how
I wasn't suggesting that. I wasn't suggesting that you personally do it. I was saying that when I said you in that context, I meant ENF. Whatever that no other third party needs to be involved in that, but that ENF then manages that through whatever internal multi-sig processes you use. It's not really for us to determine that here, right? The the question, the solution we've come up with is that the active key will be the four, the 3 of 4 multi-sig, I think that we've, and that the owner will be to the discretion of ENF, whatever your,
Yeah, and
whatever
that's
your,
the part I'm not sure. What is
Yeah,
going to
but-
be the owner key set? I don't know now.
I know, but we can't really help you in that because that's your internal decision and your, whatever your processes are, however you control other funds, would be
I
how
can't
I would think
replicate the way I control the other funds.
Oh.
The other funds requires the EOSIO.prods. And so you'd be putting EOSIO.prods as the owner. Or part of EOSIO.prods as part of the owner. And so it's different. So I know it's on us to figure that out. I'm thinking, I'm not sure if I can figure it out, which then kind of makes this potential structure as maybe a moot.
Well, I think you're a smart guy. And you have a big team, and I think, you guys will figure it out. Like, I don't think we have to figure out on this call, but
Aaron, you and I can touch base on this, figure this out.
Yeah, I think this could be an offline thing. You guys could come back to how it's actually going to be done, and then you can tell us in channels, and we can, it's basically everyone has approved this framework. You need to figure out what your own internal process is. And I know you haven't figured it out right now, but you definitely will. You'll figure it out. It's not insolvable. So I'd say we kind of just, what this body votes on and determines, we've kind of figured out. If you were to come back to us and say, you know what, guys, it's just not going to work out because of whatever, which I think is unlikely, then we could reset it. But, I don't think we have to stay on this topic when it's pretty much, we can't, the rest of us can't help you because we don't know the parameters, but you do, and you guys will yeah.
I think we do need to have the vote, though, about transferring the funds before contract execution into an EOS controlled account with MSIGs to approve milestones, right? I mean, that we haven't actually voted on this. We just talked about it.
We'll do that. And the vote would be that the active permissions are as per everything else, and the owner permissions are controlled to the discretion of the ENF and which they will propose, right? And then we don't have to. That's what I would propose we do. Is anybody?
I'll work with you, Aaron. Basically, I won't sign the contract until we figure this out.
Yeah.
And so I'll work with Aaron. Maybe Aaron and I can make a proposal, and then at that time in the channel we can vote. Because even if you vote on putting this liability, I could choose not to accept that. Just status quo remains. So let's come back with an actual proposal first instead of voting right now.
Okay.
I'm thinking it could be something like just owner is EOSIO.grants and active is EOSIO plus.wg. But Aaron, you're good. You and I can touch base on this.
Yeah.
And then we'll make the proposal to the group.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. There we go. Discuss process for community votes on top 21 items. I think this was this related to the other one we were talking about earlier? That's for next week. Is that right?
It's so this is something unfortunately, I don't think we actually addressed in a timely manner that we need to. So the idea behind this, if I recall correctly, is that we decided we're going to periodically review our top 21 voting within the group. And we also decided previously that one of our core values is that we are going to allow meaningful input from our community on what, on how we develop. And that seems like the right juncture to do that. But for that to really be effective, then we need to figure out, we need to do it in advance. We can't say, we have to let people know that there's a comment period, give them time to comment and discuss, and give us time to read that and hear their concerns before we just go ahead with a decision-making process, because we truly want this. We truly want the input. It's not just a optics thing. So we need to figure out what that process is, and how long a comment period, what's the venue, things like that. And of course, as we get closer and closer to the meeting, now we're just a week out from the meeting that was going to where we're going to try to start determining these things, and we haven't opened that up for comment. We are losing time to do that. So we either need to say, okay, well, I think the most important thing is that we say how we're going to go forward quarter by quarter from now on, but it would also be nice to be able to start that, and might push back our determination, so that we can have time to have a comment period for people in our communities. I think that's what we were talking about.
Yes, I think that's what I understood as well. Kind of like what we did with the blue papers and that feedback period, but just wider throughout any or all of the communities should they wish to participate.
So what do you think is the next action, though? Like, that describes sort of
I think it would just be setting an amount of time, and each respective chain has to figure out how they do their own thing. But basically, we allow whatever. So we said, I'm just making this up, let's say 2 weeks or whatever it is. And then within that period of time, the chains need to figure out what they do on their end. But then the expectation is after that period of time, whatever that may be, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever that may be, they come back to the rest of the group, to the coalition, with here's what we learned and here's how it's influencing basically our position in terms of prioritization, if anything.
Yeah, I think I think that's essentially it. We should set a process where every quarter on the, whatever week of the quarter, right, the fourth Monday of the quarter or whatever, or first, whatever it may be, we are going to have this meeting, and so we just backdate these other things to okay, well, we want 2 weeks of open comment period prior to us making that decision, if that's enough, and that seems like it is, right? And if it's not, we can update it in the future. And so like, we want to set up a process that's our process ongoing, and then in this specific case, we want to see, well, do we want to have a shortened period of comment, or do we just want to push back that decision and have the full period that we're going to do and just have it come a little bit later, which is probably what I would lean towards, right? So if we say, hey, we're going to do this on the X week, generally, but this first time we're going to do it 2 weeks later, so we can have meaningful input. I would support that. 2 weeks seems fine. Does this seem like a reasonable framework to move forward for anybody else?
The one thing I would suggest considering is that after the first prioritization round, it took a lot longer to work through details than I think anybody expected. And so instead of, and then also now, because we have several RFPs going out, a lot of the key constituents of some of the communities are now very well engaged for the near future. Maybe instead of focusing on how often a year we would do this, let's just pick when the next date is and focus on that, and then see where we are to determine if it is something that we can really do every 3 months.
I think that as we do this, I think that it's unlikely to be as onerous in successive times as it was the very first time we were trying to put that together. So I think I would tend towards saying, let's set up a process that everybody knows, it's on the calendars, and I think that is more important than having it always be an ad hoc date. Hey, is it time for us to do this again? Yeah, it is.
I was just thinking the next one, because like if we were to reprioritize today, right? What is the likelihood we could really find enough developers out in the world to do the top 3 priorities, right? It's very small. And that's what I'm saying is if we focus on the next one to make sure we get the process down. Again, this is just a suggestion, but I'm just throwing it out. I wouldn't want to burden people with a recurring process that doesn't necessarily have an actionable output.
Well, I think that you're probably right. We have a lot going on, but I think I believe that if you want something to work, and on an ongoing basis, you need to set up a reproducible process, and that's how I think that for that we should just move forward, and that we don't treat this necessarily like it's the biggest thing in the world. Right. This is especially this first one where we can be clear with people. We're doing this and we're going to listen, and but it's it's not necessarily likely we're going to have we're probably not going to have any kind of major reshuffling, because we just already did that. But we do need to periodically revisit it, or else we get entrenched with things. It also means by having a process, then as things come up to discuss, then we say, well, unless this is on fire, then we have a process and we can table any such discussions. And it also saves us time in the future from, when things come up, we can go, okay, well, there's not an ongoing hack happening here or anything like that. So this is going to get tabled until our scheduled meeting for it. So there's a lot that having a set process helps. As you guys probably will notice, for me, my personal bent is this time, as we establish what the coalition is doing, I think this is the right time to err on the side of creating reproducible processes, because we don't want that. We want this. I don't want this to be where anything is done ad hoc. And because it's a coalition, because sometimes we don't even know who's going to be running the meeting from time to time and things like that. I think all that works, but the more we have something that's nailed down as a process, the more we don't have to think about it on a daily basis. We can just push those off. That's why I would lean towards just having something we figure out how we're always going to do it, and pretty much do it that way.
Douglas, one thing I think that I agree with this on is that we should regroom the top 21, it's 22 or whatever, every quarter. And then I think we can leave it up to the chains on how they want to run their process of collecting input and going through that. So some chains may want a lightweight process, some chains may want a really in-depth process, but we agree that on some set date that, Kirsten and Jeff can run, that we'll do the regroom. And whether you're bringing your community data or, it's just, someone is the dictator in that chain. Then the chains can at least go back and do a vote, and they used whatever process they felt was usable for them. But I think for sure we should regroom this list periodically. I think we've learned a lot in the last 6 months, and so how we do that can be left to the chains. And then, but we all have to be on the same voting sequence of quarterly. Does that sound reasonable, Douglas?
But I also agree with what Jeff mentioned to a certain extent, whereby the amount of work that trickles after that is quite substantive. And as much as, like Doug said, we'll get faster at it, that amount of work was not negligible. And as much as every 3 months would be great, I'm not necessarily convinced that we'll be able to meet that frequency or assign the amount of resources to do the work after the priorities have been set to rewrite, because we did right after the prioritization, we actually laid down every item, what that entailed, etc. That was a lot of work on very few people. Now, of course, if we're retaking the 21, adding a few not necessarily recreating the wheel every time, but I would prefer, kind of like what Jeff mentioned, we say when the next one is. The target is every 3 months, but the next one will inform whether or not is it really in 3 months or is every 4 months and 3 times a year instead of 4 times a year. I'm not convinced, and I guess I'm with Jeff on that one. The amount of work afterwards was quite substantive. After the prioritization, right? The actual work of writing out the items.
Yeah. Now I think that we've got 20, we've done that initial work of figuring out each of those, and the new ones that we would write would simply be anything that was deemed,
we never finished off those 22, by the way. I think we have 4 or so that we gave up on writing because they were lower in priority. And because the amount of work was so substantive. So just caveat, we never finished off those 22.
Yeah, I'm also fine. I mean, I'm not. A quarter was suggested, but it could be semi-annually. But what I would, but to respond to what you said, Ted, I actually don't believe this is a chain by chain issue. I think that because we've said, hey, this could be something where a group of developers that aren't necessarily affiliated with any one chain could come in and share their needs. It could be something where Ultra says, "Hey, we need," So I think it's more of a general comment period and not a but that can be. That can be send your emails here, right? Or here's the Telegram group or whatnot, and people can bring these forward. And
in the end, wouldn't it still be the 4 chain heads laying down their votes?
The 4 chains voting, like we've always said from the beginning, that we're open to input, but the votes are ultimately coming from whatever that constitutes a membership.
Right, but if the 4 chain heads are laying down their votes, they're human beings. They're going to determine how they want to absorb that information and what forums and what methodologies and ways, right? Because in the end, you have 4 people voting. And, you can't tell Eve, well, Eve, you have to read through all of these forums and you have to comb through these emails and you have to do this. There might be some data presented that was, groomed by some other members in the coalition that people could listen to. But in the end, you're still going down to 4 voting members.
Sure. I think that good ideas could come from anywhere and that the cream rises to the top. And if something is, enough that we would actually consider adding it to one of our priority lists, that it would be something that we'd all want to weigh in on, no matter where it came from, because we needed to vote, and that not every idea is going to do that, right? Like most ideas are going to be, yeah, we've heard it. Yeah, most of these things are going to be, yes, we are fully aware of this, but or it's already we've already decided or whatnot. There's going to be very few new ideas, but when the new ideas do come in and they're good, it's we don't know for sure where they're going to come from.
We also. Last time we didn't, do the process where we allowed each chain head to kind of promote the ideas they were most passionate about and lobby the other chain heads to maybe consider altering their votes. We just kind of blindly filled out this. It just took so much time. We just kind of put the numbers in versus allowing, Douglas, you to say, talk for a while and explain why item number 13, that we were voting on was, you felt really strongly it would help all 4 chains, and for Eve to talk a while about an item he cared about. We just kind of threw numbers in the spreadsheet, and maybe that would be something that would be an improvement if we had people talking about why they did or did not feel, that some of these items should be more highly ranked than others. We just did that.
We had an admittedly not ideal setup, for the first one. We had to, and we had to scramble. And I think we accomplished, the group did very admirably. And I don't have any. I'm just talking about going forward, how we set this up.
Maybe going forward, we'd have that opportunity now to have people explain why they feel the way they do.
That's what I'm asking for. And very small point, TELOS doesn't really have a chain head. There's 4 of us, and to the extent we go back, we have a voter, right? That's imbued in Jesse, but sorry,
just mean the person that's writing down one. You only get one vote, right?
One vote. Yeah.
Person recording the vote, I refer to as chain.
Are we still intending on doing the process similar to whereby we give a score to each item per chain?
Yes.
Which then tallies and then essentially ranks. So there's a score and a weight or whatever, a weight and a rank. Yeah. Okay.
Same thing. Yes.
Gotcha.
One thing.
And that's where I think there's a difference with different chains. Like our EOS constituents may say this item is priority rank 1 with weight of whatever the top rank or something, that which may differ from somebody else, right? And that's where listening to our constituents will be different than listening to the other constituents.
Wax really about performance or something, and our chains aren't being beaten the way Wax.
I wouldn't necessarily want to lose that part for sure. I think that part worked well, but yes, there's multiple improvements to make the system, pitching to the others, just perhaps cleaning out maybe less items too. I think 20 was quite ambitious. Maybe we just focus on 10 or something like that, whatever it may be.
One thing I could suggest is if everybody recalls last time, some of the votes were on basically titles that didn't really have descriptions, and something that came out afterwards was there was different interpretations of what the title was. So one thing we could do to help alleviate that is if each of the chains coming into these kind of collaborative meetings, make sure that they write out that 1-pager executive summary for the ones that they care about. So it's not like we're going to try to write down, every idea and blow it out, because we know at the end of the day, we're not going to do more than a handful of these anyway. And that could be a way that gets us to that understanding and discussion faster.
Yeah.
Well, that would also reduce some of the burden that I talked about, the after the fact. Now would actually be done before the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the initial process, what we were trying to do was capture everything. And even if some of those things had very different definitions within us, we know those are lower priority. I think it's fine that we didn't do those. But again, if anybody, either because it's a direct priority from their users, from their core dev team, or because their users are demanding it, or anything for whatever reason, we need to put something forward, then part of that would be, okay, if you're going to put something forward, you have to have an actual description. Like, you have to provide that, right? If you are, whether you're a chain or a community member or whatever, you gotta not just you can't just say, hey, we need this name. Like, put together a minimum viable sort of description of what that is for us to consider, right? And then that moves that onto the proposer, which I think is where it belongs, as opposed to we going, hey, we want this feature, and then after the fact say, what do we actually mean by that, right? In considering something, and if we want those good suggestions to rise to the top, we need to have it. We need to know exactly what we're discussing from the beginning, and that'll shorten the tail end of this process also.
So when do we want to have the next priority review and vote? And maybe we can work backwards from there on the stuff we want to do to prepare for it.
I think it'll take 1 month at minimum for us to do a good job, and also, including getting 2 weeks of input from the community, which seems like a reasonable comment period. So if we push this back to the first week of October, and we continue to keep the prep on our lists, on our agendas for each meeting, I think that would be fine. If we push it back further than that, and then we get into end of year holidays, it's not going to be a priority, and I wouldn't want it to slip that far, because then we just won't do it. Would be my fear. So I propose we push it back to we pick a date around the first week of October. And in this discussion, we've come up with a lot. I think there's a lot of good solutions there, and we need to just kind of keep pushing forward. And then we could, with a goal towards starting the actual comment period in 2 or 3 weeks from now. Does that seem reasonable? Okay, I don't think we need to vote on that. That's just a
I'm
sort
good.
of
I
internal
was bobbing my
procedure.
head to say yes.
Yep.
All right. So there is about 5 minutes left in the meeting. Actually, the standards we already talked about.
I had asked just in the chat, and I don't know if you were responding to me or not, but the Antelope channel, Brandon and I discussed it. Some people asked about getting admin. Brandon and I discussed maybe setting up a bot that would have some answers to commonly asked questions, and just some high level rules, because you can't really have admins if there's no rules. So I just wanted to see if there's any, I guess, concerns with setting up a bot and having, like a treat other people with respect rule and a no price talk rule. Price talk typically in an official channels leads nowhere. And I advocated we use the same bot that TELOS uses, which gives you like, just type / P, and you reply to somebody that's asking about price with / P. The bot deletes your comment, and then the bot replies to them with something that says price talk is not, here, but in an unofficial price talk channel, go over here, links them. My thought was we could have every response, include all the coalition chains, respective channels. As we evolve it, we could, if somebody wants an explorer, we could link to each channel's explorers. We could have one that explains there's no new token, because that's another frequent question we get asked, that just maybe general info that just explains, I think Brandon suggested ecosystem. It explains, Antelope's the framework, Antelope's the software, there's no new token, EOS isn't going away, you don't have to claim anything, etc. Like just some high level, like basically an FAQ. So I was just suggesting we put something together like that, but I didn't want to decide we have a no price talk rule or anything else.
It works great in our chats. I don't know if you guys have something similar, but the same, we all know the same questions come up over and over again. And, I think it's akin to a FAQ. And Jesse, if I'm right, you don't have to be you don't have to be an admin to do that, right? Any community member can go /P.
Right. And it deletes your / comment, and it replies to the person you replied to. So you can make people think that we have an AI bot. Because it's kind of like the bot's answering you. It's like, thanks.
And we also, we just have this. It's ready to go. We would just need to tailor the text messages to this use, right? So it's not like we have to develop anything. We just roll
it's super
out.
easy. You got to figure out. Yeah, that's what I was saying, Brandon. We got to figure out what we want the messages to be. We have to agree, what the rules are, like pretty simple ones. Nothing sophisticated. And then the bot needs an identity, like a name and a photo. So it could be the Dick bot, or Brandon had a good one. Something else. But anyway, before we decided just between the two of us that was a good idea and we were going to do it, I just wanted to make sure nobody here has any reservations about that. And then I think some people suggested each chain should have a representative admin in there, and I'm fine with that too. I saw you accepted Gnome, but something like that I think probably makes sense too, so everybody has some fair representation.
I'm good with that. I don't know if it's that if you're looking for comments, but I'm okay with that.
No, I'm only looking for people to say no, that's a bad idea, and then I'd be glad I asked. But I felt like that wouldn't happen. I just figured I'd ask.
Yeah, I think I think it's good. I think it's fine. I think that's the channel that I was added in, that I was put as an admin. I'm going to say I'm probably not going to be adminning another channel. I already have.
Oh, you're made admin. I didn't notice that. I just moved you.
You did that, no? Oh, okay.
No, I just invited you.
Me and Brandon are the only admins right now, and I don't think we've added anybody. I haven't.
Oh, good. Then even better. Yes, I'm good with that.
You're off the hook. We just wanted to be there.
I just got a message that said like, "Hey, you've been requested," and it was in reply to somebody asking for adminning. Like, wait, what is this group?
Oh,
what's going on?
Yeah, no. Observe only.
All right.
Someone suggested me, but I made it clear that my first action would be to mute Blue Dog, and you know, and then that was the end of that. So you might try that, Eve.
Yeah, it's like jury selection. Like, are you biased? Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna move to other list.
Yes, and everyone else is too. I'm the only one who's honest about it.
but you know, Jesse brought up really good point, which is we just need clear rules, and once we establish those, then it'll be a little easier to enforce. Otherwise, the admins are just kind of like running around willy-nilly making decisions about.
I would just suggest that we empower the current admins to. I mean, it's you and Jesse, and you guys are pretty level-headed guys. You know, until there's some reason other not to do so, we just let the admins do it as they think is right. And if there's a problem, we deal with it then. I mean, this again goes back to the things that we're a bunch of people who run things already, and sometimes we, you know, bend over backwards to make some things, you know, so, you know, equitable or whatever, that we actually just slow it down. Let's let Brandon and Jesse do what they think should be done, and if there's a problem, we'll discuss it, but I doubt there will be. Is that a reasonable way to go forward for everybody? I mean, we're not spending any money on this, and we're not, you know, and it's to serve our community. So, and it's not rocket science either. So I just propose we just let them go and have their head. And if they screw up, or if they make some bad decisions, or if they make some question, you know, things people question, then we just talk about it, you know, and move on. Like, this doesn't need to be a topic of discussion here in this meeting.
All right, so we're at 4:00. Is there any final things we want to talk about?
I'd love to get off the call as soon as possible.
All right. Well, good. 4:00. Everybody have a great day, evening, whatever your time zone is.
Labor Day weekend for
Labor Day weekend.
I think both sides of the pond this time.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be out next week. So I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Great discussion. Fun seeing everybody. Catch you guys on the flip side.
Bye all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.